The United States' interference in the Korean War was a major turning point in the war. North Korea was about to annex the South when the US and UN decided to intervene, giving opportunity for the South, but bringing more tension between Russia and the US. It's the 1910s, and Korea is not doing well. Ever since 1889, Japan had become an imperialist country, being hostile to everybody. Japan had launched an attack on the Korean peninsula a few years ago, and Korea was surrendering. Japan had formally annexed Korea. Fast forward past World War I, towards the end of World War II, Korea wanted its independence. In 1941, Korea declared war on Japan. The organization of the Korean Restoration Army consisted of many Chinese soldiers fighting for independence. They fought bravely. Following the Japanese surrender of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the US and Soviet Union moved into Korea. The US would move in from the south, and the Soviet Union moved in from the north. Not knowing what to do with the new Korea, the United States proposed a division of Korea. On the 38th parallel would be the dividing line of North Korea and South Korea. It was 1949, and Kim Il-sung would rise to power in North Korea and become the supreme leader. In 1950, with Stalin's approval, Kim Il-sung ordered his men to invade South Korea. It only took 3 days before South Korea suffered over 500 casualties and was losing occupied land. North Korea's army of over 100,000 soldiers was too much for their measly 35,000 men. Only 1 month later, and almost all of South Korea had been annexed. What remained of South Korea was cornered in Busan. It seemed like a lost cause. The top commander of the US, MacArthur, proposed a risky plan, and that was to invade far behind the enemy lines, where Incheon once stood. This would not only cut off ammunition and supplies for North Korea, but would also allow them to take back Seoul, the capital. Many other commanders were against the plan, saying it was too inconvenient, and proposed different places. But MacArthur stated that due to how inconvenient and terrible it was, they would be able to surprise the North Koreans. On September 15th, they went ahead with the plan. Downwards where troops were cornered at Busan, the UN decided to join. The plan worked, and the North Koreans were being pushed back fast. On September 30th, just 15 days after the Allies invaded from Incheon, they successfully crossed where once was the border of the two countries. Now, this was when a tough choice had to be made. They could either defend the border until the enemy gave up, or push on until North Korea was no more. Pressured by MacArthur, President Truman authorized him and his men to continue past the border. In our opinion, this was the right choice. The North Korean army was quickly pushed back, almost faster than the speed the South Koreans were just over a month ago. Soon enough, North Korea was about to be annexed, which made China worried about having a US-controlled country bordering them. So, on behalf of the remaining forces in North Korea, the Chinese invaded.
The Chinese entering the war came as a surprise for America. But it wasn't a strategic entry, it was more ideological. During World War II, China and Korea worked together to defend themselves from the Japanese. Korea was annexed and China was severely destroyed. China still owed Korea for its help. American forces were unprepared for the Chinese onslaught and were quickly being pushed back. Within 2 weeks, the Chinese pushed the American forces back to the 38th parallel. On January 4th, 1951, Seoul was captured by the communists again. America was starting to panic, to the point where they considered using nuclear weapons against the Chinese forces. General MacArthur asked President Truman to permit him to use atomic weapons. Truman denied MacArthur, which made him furious. MacArthur would later be fired and replaced by General Matthew Ridgway. We believe this was a good choice. Ridgway and his troops forced their way back to the 38th parallel, where they would fortify their positions to remain. During all of this, government officials were busy negotiating about the armistice.
UN forces would remain at the 38th parallel for the next 2 years, resulting in nothing happening, at least in terms of the battlefield. Behind government desks was a different story. The US forces were more willing to negotiate than the communists. The US was also weakened in terms of relations with European allies. On the communist side, China and North Korea were suffering severe losses, but kept fighting due to how the US treated Soviet prisoners during World War II. Not wanting to repeat the same mistakes, the US offered communist prisoners of war either to return to their country or be repatriated to Taiwan or South Korea. However, the Chinese did not like this idea, which delayed the armistice. Following the election of Eisenhower, the communists were willing to negotiate, but Mao feared that Eisenhower would escalate the war. Eisenhower stated he would use deeds rather than words. In the South, the US and the UN were initiating new strategies that were effective. Due to the number of losses, the Chinese were more willing to negotiate. Things would stagnate for a while until the death of Stalin in 1953. After that, the communists were more willing to negotiate than ever. General Mark Clark sent a message to Kim Il-sung and the Chinese commander Peng Dehuai that proposed a solution to the prisoners of war issue. The Soviet Union agreed and encouraged China and North Korea to accept it as well. President Syngman Rhee did not want the war to end though. He would go on to release over 25,000 North Korean prisoners of war, which infuriated China. They blamed Syngman Rhee for it. The US ended up apologizing. On July 27, 1953, the armistice was signed, stopping fire but not ending the war completely.
Now, how does this tie to our argument that the interference was a good choice? Well, without the interference from the Allies, South Korea wouldn't exist, and North Korea would be much more powerful and be a threat to the US and Europe as a whole. One could argue that the war brought more tension, but if South Korea was annexed, the Soviet Union could have, and most likely, still exist, which would have led to an even bigger war that would have included the use of atomic weapons and be the end of the world.